Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. We are back for season 3, and I am honored to have my guest. But I'm going to let my brother introduce himself. So, why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Pleasure to be with you, good brother. My name is Rann Miller. I'm an educator, author, writer. I work for Camden's Promise Charter Schools. I'm working with DEI. I'm the director for DEI in our network, as well as an AP US history teacher. As a writer, I've written a number of different op-eds on a number of different topics, really focusing on education, history, politics, and the intersection with race. And lastly, I'm an author of a recently released book, Resistance Stories from Black History for Kids, catering to our babies grades 4 through 8, but certainly available for all to read, parents, grandparents, families. And why I do what I do, simply that, man. I love educating and I love working with Black and brown kids. When I see them, I see myself. When I teach them, I teach what I wish I was taught. When I relate to them, I relate to them in a way that I wish that I was related to. And so, it's not about going back to sort of fight off some demons, but more or less coming up to help young people overcome theirs through education.
I love that positioning. I think it lends itself to where I would love to go with you, brother. You wrote an article, very insightful piece, and something that I felt like you kind of gave voice to what I had been feeling and trying to articulate to others, and that is the paradoxical experience of the effects of Brown versus the Board of Education. And so, for folks who are tapping in, who might not be, who need a brush up on history, as it were, could you kind of explain to us the positionality of that decision and what you were alluding to with its paradoxical effect?
Sure. So we know Brown versus Board of Education dismantled separate but equal specifically in public schools. But the way that the decision was handed down didn't necessarily translate in the way we would have liked. The decision said that it was detrimental for Black children to attend all Black schools, not with white children, right? And it sort of led to this idea of integration. But what really happened is that you had Black children taken from Black schools, put into white schools with white teachers, white administrators. And as a result, Black educators lost their jobs for the most part. They were not brought into those white schools. And although if we look at public schools today, certainly there are Black students that are attending schools with white teachers and Black teachers and all of these sort of things in diverse settings. Really, if we look at the numbers and we look at the data, we can see that Black students are still segregated more, if now more than ever, depending on where we're talking about. So for me, writing that article, I was really thinking about what is really the crux of Brown, and has Brown really did what we would have hoped that it would have done? We're celebrating it. This is the 70th year anniversary, but we see that true integration really didn't happen. What true integration would be for white students to attend Black schools as well as Black students attending white, but only one thing happened, not the other. And if you look back into the history of the case, thinking of Linda Brown, her parents didn't really want to send her to a white school. It didn't have anything to do with the Black school being bad. What it had to do with was access. The white school was just closer. And so for them, it was just a matter of convenience. And as any parent knows, they have to make things as convenient as possible when you're talking about kids, just to make things work. Brown missed the mark. It missed an opportunity for us to achieve a real level, a real sense of integration. What it really lent itself to was more or less assimilation.
And I think that last piece is, I think it's something that we really have to contend and grapple with in our understandings. That throughout our history, right, in these yet to be United States of America, we have continuously made decisions that on the surface, on its merits, on the paper, sounded like it was a great idea, but it really was like almost to pacify an act of justice, an act of liberation. And then when you peel that thing back and you look at its layers, you find out that it didn't have the intended effect. Like I found myself um, echoing the words or the thoughts and sentiments of MLK when he said he wondered if he had asked his people to assimilate into a burning building, where where now we are forced into situations where, yeah, it's not separate but and equal anymore, but now it's integrated, but you now have to check everything you are at the door. And now, as a result of what you just said and what you shared, there are lasting impact as a result of that decision, even to this day, where you and I on the screen are 1.3% of the teaching force, like an anomaly almost. And so, how does Brown, for those who may not know, how does Brown affect that? And then, secondly, my second would be, as you think about the impact of that decision and you think about your own schooling experience, how do you see those things kind of lining up or intertwining and affecting kind of your schooling experience?
Those are good questions. So that first one, just to reiterate, the fact that you just said it, 1.3% of all teachers in this country are black men, right? Less than 6% of all teachers are black, period. So then you have a decision that says, oh yeah, we want to integrate, but at the end of the day, the people in positions of power are white. They can dictate what that integration looks like, quote unquote integration looks like. And so we have a situation where, again, we have more white teachers, more white administrators than we do black teachers. Black administrators, same thing for folks of color in general. And that is perpetuated even as we're adding students of color, even as we look at the demographics today, where more students in this country are students of color than white students. Still, unfortunately, the faculty administration, that does not reflect the demographics of students. And that is part of Brown's legacy. For me, man, as a kid, I was a Catholic school kid. So my parents, I'm only child. My parents made the decision to put me in a Catholic school, but even with that, we look at private schools. The numbers are worse with respect to administrators, with respect to teachers being of color, being black, right? And so my experience, at the very least, I grew up in Camden, New Jersey. When I went to Catholic school, I went to Catholic school in Camden, New Jersey. And so the students look like me, sound like me. And the mission of the church really forced white teachers to think a little bit differently. Not all the way, but they did think a little differently, understanding the mission and the demographics that they had. Now, I went to Catholic school in high school as well. And man, was it a culture shock, complete culture shock, right?
I can
More
imagine.
Yeah, I've never been to school with white kids before until ninth grade. And so now the school is mostly white. The teachers, I was used to that, unfortunately. The way that Brown, I just think of those schools that closed, those school districts that closed as a result of Brown. I think of those new private districts that opened up in those southern states because of Brown to, make sure that those school districts stayed white. And I just think about how that impacts the education or the way that one looks at education if you're a black student at that point. And the same thing is true looking at education now. Like my parents, I'm sure for them, like any parent, they want to give their kid the best education. But how does Brown impact that? How did Brown and the ways in which Brown was implemented impact the way that my parents, anyone's parents, looked at what a good education was, how they defined what a good education was? As a parent myself, thinking about where our kids go to school, there are times where my wife had some, and I had some tough conversations where we looked at certain districts that may have been a little bit blacker than others and said, well, are we sure that that's really a good district? And we had to check ourselves and say, hold on, time out. What would make it a bad district? Simply because the population of teachers and administrators are blacker than other places? That's not a reason why it shouldn't be considered a good district, right? And so I think Brown has a role to play in not only what is, but what we imagine is, what we think is, and how we define what is. And I think that's a legacy that we really don't discuss. How these decisions, how these policies that come about really impact our view of what really is without having any sort of awareness of what the data says, what the research says, right? Because let's be honest, folks don't have access to that. They don't have access to getting the data or the research. They don't have the time access to really sit and look at it because why? Capitalism is tearing us apart to the extent that folks have to work and are constantly thinking about survival as opposed to really getting in the weeds of what education means, particularly for Black and brown kids.
And I think, so much there. But I think in addition to what you shared is when you think about the impact of a black parent, like you alluded to it, and even stated with you and your bride. Like for me, I had to make a decision on where to send my kids to school, and I needed to almost balance culture,
That's right.
acceptance, belonging with access, resources, and and educational autonomy, if you will.
Yeah,
And you find that as you continue to shift one way or the other, there's a cost that is
that's right.
going to be asked of you, regardless of where you land. And you hear me, I'm not advocating for one way or another. I believe
Sure.
that every family should have to make that decision and 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 really think through what it is that they believe is best for their child. But for me, my kids are going to a district even now where it's more blue collar, definitely majority white, and there is an impact on the cultural cost, the the sense of belonging, the having to explain oneself all the time. And I think that there's a lot of that folks who are from, majority context or whatever have you don't even think about. And so when I think about that, and I think about the role that folks like you and I who are in education today um, have, I hearken back to something that you said in that same article when you named that many of the civil rights leaders that we esteem and rightly so came from the work of black educators.
Hmm.
And when
Hmm.
I think about that in relation to today, I almost see a baton, if you will, being passed. And so, if you could think back with me using your history lens and talk a little bit about what you shared there, but also its intended or hopefully the impact on folks like you or I who are in education and the work we do today.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think that I don't even know when I had the aha moment, but and I remember it was reading a book by Dr. Jarvis Givens, Fugitive Pedagogy, the work of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and just reading that work, thinking about you know the idea of Negro History Week becomes Black History Month, the idea of Dr. Woodson using his textbooks that he wrote to give to black teachers as even though they were told what they were supposed to teach, that became part of the hidden curriculum that they taught when there wasn't white surveillance going on, right? I think about the leaders that emerged from those black schools. In that article, I think I mentioned folks like Angela Davis, um, you know, trying to think, Congressman Lewis, John Lewis. Those folks emerged from that tradition. When you think of all those leaders in the civil rights movement, they didn't come from white schools. They came from black schools. And what I found interesting really wasn't just that point, but the point that because there aren't black schools in the sense of black leaders teaching black children, and those educators were leaders, what have we lost as a result of that? Folks always talk about what's the new civil rights movement? What's the new civil rights movement, right? But where are the teachers that taught those revolutionaries? Where are the folks that taught your Kwame Ture's, your Bobby Seals? Where are those folks that taught your John Carlos and Tommy Smith? Those teachers were removed as a result of Brown versus the Board of Education. And so for me, the baton you talk about, which I think is absolutely apropos, the idea for me with that piece was just to say for us as black educators, we are in that tradition, whether we realize it or not. We are in the tradition of those black educators who taught black children, and not only taught them, but taught them for a purpose of liberation. That's what educating black children is. That's what it's all about. whether you're talking about during the antebellum period, whether you're talking about Jim Crow, or whether you're talking about now, and there's many names we can call today.
Yeah.
But that's what it really is. And so my hope and prayer is that Black educators see themselves in light of that tradition and
Mm.
carry forth the work of educating, with that end of guiding their students, not just Black students, all students, to a place of liberation. We can't get there alone. We have to get there together. And that's the power, of Black educators.
I love that and that push because the thing that it made me think about, and you talk about this in your writing, is teaching is political, regardless of how you want to chalk that up or what soundbite you want to take. Teaching is political. There are votes that you must cast in your respective county where people will now govern how funds are allocated. You have to run to be on a board of education. Like, teaching to its core is political. You don't teach in a vacuum. Our babies come in and they come with a wealth of experiences and things that they take in from the world around them, and you teach students before you teach standards, and therefore if they show up and they have a certain understanding, you bring that in to how you engage them, right? And so when I think about that, and I think about what you said with regard to Black educators, I think about folks like your Byron Donalds. I think about folks like your Tim Scotts,
Hmm.
who, my perspective is, even if they are, and I don't believe they are, but even if they're convinced of their personal positions as it relates to their alignment with the Republican candidate for president, who I will not name, they have cashed in, if
Mm,
you will,
that's
their
right.
blackness for positionality or at least alignment with power. And when I think about that in regards to our Black educators in school, I wonder how many of us, because of the socialization of teaching, because of how we've been trained, because of um, a lens, if you will, that kind of lends itself to, well, I have to be hard on them because life is going to be hard on them, and all of these things. I wonder how many of us have cashed in our chips, metaphorically speaking, to align with the dominant culture's view of what educating Black bodies looks like, which is about compliance and control.
That's right.
I wonder
That's
how
right.
many of us have done that versus the liberation you speak of, because liberation in its core is subversive, it's disruptive, it goes against, it's counter what you know most folks would want. Every revolutionary pissed some people off.
That's right.
And so and so I think about that, and I think about liberatory education, and I'm hoping that the audience is gleaning from this conversation and from the words that you've shared that a choice to liberate is a choice to, whether it you like it or not, piss some people off, rub some people the wrong way. Um, but at the end of all of that is is building a group of young people who who are not going to be shaken, if you
Yeah.
will, by what
Yeah.
the world is going to ask them to give up, but understand that it's precious. They hold tight to it and they continue to be who they are in a system that wants to break them down.
Yeah. 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 I think that's so critical. You make a great point. It is a choice. Education is political. It boggles my mind that people say that it's not. But like you just said, people run for school board, and what do they run as? Either a Republican or a Democrat. So it's political. And that impacts what's happening, right? Educators have to make a choice. Black educators have to make a choice. What are we here to do? Are we here to maintain what has already been that has been harming our children? Or are we here to do something different? And you made a great point. There's a cost. There's a cost. You're not going to necessarily move up in your career the ways in which you think you'd like to when you get people upset, when you piss people off. And anytime you talk about Black liberation, that is always bound to get somebody upset, right? And so there is a cost. And unfortunately, some of the people that you mentioned, and there are other people like them, have chosen to not compromise the dollar. or their dollar. They have, and some people would say, sell us out, sell us down the river,
Hmm.
portray a fraud. But the reality is, and this is why teaching history is so important, understanding the Black condition, understanding the African American experience is one where many have, not all, but many have chosen to embody the spirit of their oppressor and have taken on
Mm.
those tools as their means of liberation, right? Not to throw the BET awards out there like that, but I listen to these folks because I gotta watch because my kids is watching. I need to know what's going on. I teach high school, so I gotta know what's happening, right? I'm watching Busta Rhymes. I'm watching because Usher got his award. I'm watching Busta Rhymes the previous year, and they're all like, "Yo, let's get this money, let's get this bag," and that's what's told to our kids, and our kids are like, "Yeah, let's get this money. We just got to work hard so we can get this money." And if you don't know history and the history of oppression, if you don't know things about like the Protestant ethic, where we tie this idea of hard work to the implicit notion of being a good person because you work hard, or deserving everything because you quote unquote work hard, the idea of getting money as a means to liberate oneself, when in reality we know you can have all the money in the world, you still Black in this country, right? These are things that have to be taught, and that requires confrontation. And if we're not ready to meet that confrontation, our kids are going to suffer. I find that more educators are afraid to confront the history in the book, let alone confront other people who get mad about teaching history in the book, because it does something to you when you learn it. It does something to you when you reflect on it. But I'll tell you what, one of the greatest thrills in the world is when you tell and teach a group of young people who haven't heard this before. Their eyes light up because they know that they're in on the ground floor of something they've never heard. Like, hold on, we didn't hear this. And they look around at each other. No, we didn't hear this one before. But when you equip them in that way, they look at liberation very different than simply just quote unquote getting the bag or working hard. No shame in working hard, no shame in taking care of your pockets. We understand what all those things means, but in reality, it's what we do with up here that helps us, make sure that we're able to navigate these systems of oppression.
I think that what you, one of the things that complements what you just said is us as educators continuing to reevaluate the lenses we bring to our work. Our identities and who we are doesn't stop once we get to the classroom door. And I know that we talk about the heroism and all the things of being an educator, but we are to be skilled practitioners primarily. There is a skill in an art form and a desire to want to bring the best out of, to pull out of, right,
That's right.
our babies. And so when we think about how we show up, there are folks who have a meritocratic lens at life, and they believe that hard work merits, uh, just pay, just benefits, and things like that. And what they haven't really grappled with or wrestled with is that meritocracy is a myth. It
Mm,
does not exist across all intersections of reality. Some of the most hardest working people that I have ever met in my life exist in the place you were raised in, exist in Camden, New Jersey, where I started my teaching experience. I saw hard working folks. I had a mother sit down with her son, and he was acting up in school and kind of rebelling against these what I know now are oppressive measures of education. She sat there with tears in her eyes and said, I can't make it out of Camden, but you can. And I'll never forget those words because she was working hard to put food on the table, but it didn't merit her just pay. If you're a
mm,
woman in these yet to be United States, you know that you could work the same amount and do the same job and get 70
hmm.
cents to a dollar.
That's
Right.
right.
So we know that meritocracy is a myth. But here's the other one that I think that we have to highlight, and I want to kick it back to you, is the assimilationist lens.
Mm,
The one that says that if I adopt these cultures, the
yeah.
dominant culture's way of thinking, that it will grant me access. And it is like going to the metaphorical Wizard of Oz to only understand that it does not have power.
That's right.
You journeyed there. You said you wanted a heart, you wanted a brain, you wanted to go home, whatever it was, metaphorically speaking. But then you realized that the wizard doesn't really have any power. Well, the
Hmm.
wizard, in this sense, is your assimilationist lens that says if you just adopt these things, that it's automatically going to merit. And I think there's a tension here, and here's where I want to kick it to you. There's a tension because, in one sense, if we're going to be wise to navigate this world, we do have to give our babies an understanding of how assimilation can be used to its benefit without giving up of oneself.
Absolutely.
However, you journey too far to the other end and you recognize that then you're trading in all your chips for an allegiance to power that will exhaust you in the end.
Yeah, I think that when we think of that tension, I think there are a lot of people that think, oh, I can beat it. I can beat it.
Yes.
I got the game on it. I can work it. I know what to do. I know how to get what I'm giving too much, and they end up giving it all. And I think that, again, it comes down to us just being honest with young people and just being true to the realities that they're going to face. I think one of the things that teachers hate doing often is sharing of themselves. They feel like they have to be sort of, what do you call that? Like your researcher. They can't be attached to the community that they're researching. And there are a number of teachers that feel like they can't be attached to the students that they're teaching. And some of the most powerful things that a teacher can do is to share their experiences, particularly Black teachers who have gone through, continue to go through what those students will come up against, right? I'm not sure if that tension can ever be navigated in a way where we feel a level of, trying to choose my word right, I think a level of fulfillment. I think that we can be accomplished, right? Many of us are accomplished navigating that space. But I think that for us, right, there's some things that we have to give up that other folks don't necessarily have to give up. There's some encounters that we have to manage that other folks have to manage. They don't have to manage. And we have to ask ourselves the question, what is it that we're looking to get out of it? And I think that it goes back to the idea of, you know, what do we see liberation as? If you see liberation as something that you have to have the right amount of money, you have to know the right type of people, you have to be in the right sort of spaces, then there's some compromise that's going to come in order to achieve those things. But if you see liberation as something as, um, I know who I am, I know who my people are, and I know the goals that I should have for myself and my people, there are certain things, yeah, you may compromise certain things, of course. More than likely, those opportunities to get the other thing. But what I found in my own life, and I think you can speak to this too for yourself, you can sleep a little bit softer at night. You can look at your kids in the eye a little bit
Yeah.
straighter, a little bit longer. You can be amongst your folk and not feel out of place. And I think that that's something that money can't buy. That's something that certain spaces can't provide you. It's great to be able to go into a boardroom and navigate and move and be smooth and everything else. But even greater than that is being able to walk in your community and people know you. And I don't mean just know your name, but they know you. They know
Yeah.
your heart. They know
Yeah.
your intentions.
Yeah.
And to be able to do that, that's nothing that money can buy. And so I think that that's the thing that we have to communicate to young people, right? That's what we have to really communicate. And it's hard considering the world that we live in. It's hard considering the realities of systemic racism and white supremacy. But it's something that we have to dedicate ourselves to. And again, it's something we really have to make the genuine choice to do.
I think that that last sentence lends itself well to how I want to round out our time, and that is to highlight the work of resistance stories for Black history. Your work, pictured behind you there. I want to highlight it because here's what I want to do. In this work, you talk a lot about, or you've referenced it as a way for the coming generations to be empowered by. That resistance leads to empowerment. So I want to do two things with this question. It's a two-parter. First, I would love for you to talk about how your own resistance story came way in the release of this work, and you know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about there.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
and then the second part is how the the realization that we are standing on the shoulders of giants should empower us to continue to do liberatory work. If you could speak to those things for us, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Sure. So the first piece, I was you know, in the classroom doing all kinds of stuff, trying to find the stuff that kids weren't learning that I wish I had learned, that I know that they're not being taught. And so all of those desires turned into me going back to school, in terms of going back to my alma mater, Rutgers, and just accessing all of that good research, all of that good information, and getting tapped into academic journals and looking at different books. And then that turned into copious notes, and that turned into PowerPoint lessons and files that were in a computer. So when I was approached to write something on Black history, I knew exactly what I had to do. And resistance came to mind, one, because we don't talk about it, but two, we can find our own liberation in the resistance of others. So that led me to write this book. I love the book. I love everything that it's about because it's focused on our people, our history, Africa, the diaspora, as well as in the United States. Of course, to your point, when you do things like that, you're going to piss some people off. I definitely did. Pissed them off to the extent that I was charged with plagiarism for the book, because I got some folks really, really upset, to the extent that unfortunately the publisher pulled back the book out of fear, um,
Mm,
for repercussion from the right. And, you know, that's just what happened. No penalties on my end. I was, walked away free and clear. So much so that I was able to publish the book myself, self-publish it, and add on to it, in fact, right? Just to throw a little bit of a sting in the eye of the right, to say, listen, you're not going to stop this, and I got more for you, right?
yeah.
And so I just consider myself in a long line of liberation freedom fighters who have come up against backlash, white lash, if you will, for telling their truth, for telling the truth. And that's a tradition that I walk in. I walk in it proudly. I walk in it boldly. And thankfully, my people have not swayed their support at all for this work. And that's really what it comes down to. Like I said before, you can walk in boardrooms. Sure, there are people selling books that are making buku bucks that may have had to compromise. But, I'm not going to compromise. And that enables me the ability to walk in spaces that some other folks could never be able to walk in, spaces that Tim Scotts could never walk in, right? Because they've compromised something, and I refuse to do that. So I'm just proud of the book. I'm proud of everything that I put into it, the meticulous research, the great stories, that can help us see what liberation really looks like, from a lens that is centered on us, that can show us that if liberation can happen for Black folks then, at the root of their own hands, it can happen today at the root of ours.
Mm, I love that, brother. How can folks support, tap in, buy your book? I repeat, buy your book. Where can they go and just get connected to your brilliance, brother?
So online, it's available on Amazon. Resistance Stories from Black History for Kids, the extended version, 60 stories of resistance dating back from Africa through the diaspora and in the United States. Also, the book is available at Ida's Bookshop in Collinswood, New Jersey. If you happen to be around, I'll be there on July 20th, signing books. So if you're available, come on out, please do. but they can go right on Amazon. They can pick that bad boy up. It's something for all people, not just Black people. It's for everybody, to really see the full lens of Black history as one that is chocked with liberation, resistance stories. We often think of Black history as something where we were bestowed freedom, right? It was benevolently given. But the reality is that Black folks took it. And so my book sheds light on those moments of Black people taking freedom in their own hands.
Yeah, yeah. I love that juxta, or at least that the narrative that you're pushing there in terms of the truth. Let me say it this way: that you're pushing there that we took freedom, that we have been consistently portrayed as a passive recipient of benevolent white folks deciding to give us something um, that was rightfully ours to begin with. That
Mm-hmm.
some folks eventually woke up and said this is wrong, and we should free these folks. Versus, no, these folks are continuing to cause ruckus. These folks are continually exposing our lies. These folks are organizing and building their own. We have to do something about this, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore we fought for, we resisted, and therefore won. And we will continue to win if we continue to resist. And so I appreciate that push, brother, and I appreciate your work and your voice as it lends itself to our forward progress.
Appreciate you, brother, because what this work here is with this Liberation Lab, man, it gives Black educators a space, and it gives all educators an opportunity to learn in a safe way, right? And I think that educators are looking for that of all colors, all hues. So I appreciate you, appreciate what you're doing, and the opportunity to join you with this.
Thank you, brother. And more to come, for sure.
Indeed.